Hi folks, Andy here, and I just wanted to remind you before I get into today's show. A project I was involved with just recently, Encounters, is available exclusively on Wondery Plus, Apple, and Spotify. Encounters is a 5-part limited series where myself and co host Elle Scott, who is a complete UFO newbie, dive into a famous UFO encounter. There's a 1 episode introduction to who we are and the topic at large, and then 4 episodes on the Rendlesham Forest incident. You can listen to episode 1 free on all podcast platforms. The other 4 are exclusive currently to the Wondery Plus service. You can sign up to a free trial and binge all 4 episodes in a couple of hours, folks. So I would ask, if you can, please go and do that, or at least check out that first episode on podcast platforms. And don't forget to leave a review of Encounters. So thank you so much if you get the chance to do that. Anyway, over to today's episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome to That UFO podcast. Joining me for what I believe is her 3rd appearance on the show, I have investigative journalist, speaker, and author. Welcome back to the podcast, Leslie Kean. Leslie, welcome back.
Hey, Andy. So happy to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
Very good to finally have you on, Leslie, again. Very popular guest. Wonderful time of year. I've been very fortunate at the start of 2025 to have had so many popular names, well-respected names on the podcast, and it's great to have you back. A really interesting time for you, not only because of all the big UFO news that's currently kind of out there in the ether, but you're part of the big part of the series UFOs Investigating the Unknown season 2 now streaming, and we've been having a bit of a back and forward, Leslie, on where exactly it's streaming. But from a US point of view, you've got Hulu and Disney Plus, and a big part of the audience is in the UK as well, on Sky, on Nat Geo, on demand. So yeah, the documentary's out there, and of course in other countries as well, Leslie.
This is the problem, Andy. I mean, no, I don't think so. And again, my team is we're working with Nat Geo here in the US to try to figure out where it's going to be when. But I think the UK is like the first out of state. I don't even think Canada has it. But again, I don't really know, and they don't seem to know that much either. And so that, there's all kinds of corporations involved that are in control in different countries, and it's very hard to sort it out. I think people just have to, if people have Disney Plus, they should check there.
Yeah.
From other countries. Like you checked, it's not in the UK on Disney, but maybe for some reason it's in Canada. If somebody's listening from Canada, they can check. I can't think of any other place unless there's some place that carries Nat Geo, like Sky does in England, where it might be streaming through some service that covers Nat Geo. Those are probably.
And I'll mention England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales. We've got the 4 countries, obviously, just to not upset anyone else. But yeah, I get a lot of emails whenever a documentary comes out and it's not available blanket across the world. So you'll just have to double check, folks. But plenty of websites you can jump on. Justwatch.com tends to tell you where stuff's available and where to check it out. But we're going to talk about the 2nd season of UFOs Investigating the Unknown. And to kick off, I've actually not got this on the cheat sheet I've got here, Leslie, but how was season 1 received looking back? Because we spoke about it back at the time it came out, but now a year or so on, how do you feel season 1 turned out and what reception did it get?
Yeah, it's actually been 2 years now. It came out in January 23. Yeah, and then we had to wait. And then we got the green light for season 2. Then we had to produce season 2. So it takes time. But season 1 was really well received. That's why we were able to do season 2. And just so that people know, season 1 is much easier to access. We were talking about trying to watch season 2. Season 1 is pretty available on a lot of different platforms. So I think even in other countries, for people who haven't seen it, they should be able to get it. I mean, it was very well received, and it was originally, that season was made for CNN. CNN was our company. They oversaw the whole thing. They budgeted the show, and then it eventually went to Nat Geo because CNN had a whole lot of internal changes in their company, and they stopped airing documentaries. Fortunately, we were able to get it over to Nat Geo. But yeah, it's very good for people who don't know a lot about the topic. And really our intention, same with season 2, although I think there's things in there that be of interest to people who are knowledgeable about UFOs. But the main goal from the beginning was to reach a broad audience that doesn't know much. It's not made for the UFO community. A lot of it's going to be very familiar to people in the UFO community. That's okay. When they complain, I just say, look, we don't need to preach to the choir. We need to get to people who don't know anything. That's the whole point. And so I think that season 1 was very good at doing that. I heard from so many people who were skeptics previously or just didn't know anything, were just neutral, and they were really affected by it. So it's a very good kind of primer for people. And then season 2 goes into a little more depth on topics. We had more freedom with season 2 to explore more things in depth. And the biggest thing about season 2 that I'm really happy about is that we did 2 episodes on experiencers. And we were not permitted by CNN for season 1 to do anything on experiencers. I mean, they didn't even want us to cover, you have scientists in there. They just wanted kind of news and Washington and politics and cases, you know. So this show, we get to do a lot about science and what citizen scientists are doing. But the 2 episodes on experiencers are really kind of a breakthrough, I think, because we've integrated that topic in with, you know, the very kind of political, established, scientific, nuts and bolts stuff. And for me, they should be integrated more. I think that the experiencer element doesn't get enough attention. And so I'm really happy that we were able to mix that in, you know, with this very fact-based based series. It's 6 episodes. It's episodes 4 and 5 that deal with the experiencers. And we don't try to explain it. We don't have a lot of stories of people talking about abductions and all this. It's much more sort of an exploration of how it affects people, how broadly it can be interpreted, and how important it is that we pay more attention to it. That's the sort of the messages we're trying to convey in those 2 episodes. So I'm very pleased. I feel like it's a good step forward that we were able to cover that at all and do it as well as we did. I've had a lot of great feedback from people about it.
I'm not just paying lip service, because people who have listened to the podcast for a long time will know if I am reviewing a documentary that I've not particularly enjoyed or a series, I tend to praise its production values only. And I'll say, oh, it looks really nice. And then not much else. Okay, I can be professional when I've got people on, but even watching series like this, when the content is familiar, and it should be for someone who's meant to be researching and talking to guests and listening to all the kind of stuff and watching all the stuff out there, it does bring things back that you go, oh my God, I forgot about that, or oh yeah, that happened after that. And even just the refreshes of when you get a Grush come out and his story starts to fit into place, and it's really interesting. Even I think sometimes, I'm not saying you go looking for things, but you hear the way people change how they talk about the topic. How I'll use a really broad term, in a few documentaries over the last year or 2, I've noticed a small change, I think, in how some people refer to ATIP and OSAP from maybe how they were spoken about 6 or 7 years ago to now. And maybe that's because as time goes on, we learn a little bit more about what those programs were, who was involved in them, and things are a bit more fleshed out, so they can be spoken about perhaps in more accurate terms than they were originally, or they had to be. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, of course, Lou Elizondo's book shed a lot of light on OSAP and ATIP. And I think you're right. That's an interesting point, that over time things clarify and people do refer to things in different ways, and new details come in that you didn't, you know, that weren't there before. So it's always changing. So even if you're reviewing stories that came out 2 years ago, but you review them again 2 years later, it's going to be different. I think that's sort of what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
I agree, and I think we were able to do some of that, like the Vandenberg case that we covered in episode 1. I mean, Hal Puthoff said to me, you know, even people who know that case don't know the detail in which you presented it in episode 1. He was really impressed by that. So, you know, there are nuggets in there for people, even those who already know the case. They're going to learn new things.
yeah, and I think at a time,
Yeah, I mean, I also want to just take my hat off to Breakthrough Films, who made the series, because I think you're saying about, you just say praise production values when you don't like a series, but I have to say, I think their production values were really high and really outstanding. And I just think they're great filmmakers, and they really did a fantastic job visually and holding the narratives together without a narrator, telling a story very clearly. All of that takes a lot of talent. And that was not my job. That was the filmmaker's job. So I just want to acknowledge them. They're really, really great, and great people too.
Absolutely, and it did have good production values as well. I think that's probably something that's getting easier for even amateurs to make reasonably good documentaries now because of the software available, the CGI you can get at your fingertips using ChatGPT or any of those types of systems and softwares. But then to make a truly good documentary, you have to put the effort in to draw that audience. And it's fair to say we've been spoiled in the last 6 months because we've had George Knapp's series available on Netflix. We've had James Fox documentary finally came out. We had Kelly Chase's and J. Christopher King's documentary. I know you've worked with them before, Leslie, at various
Yeah.
events. Cosmosis. I've just had Kelly on a few days ago, and I think we spoke about. I spoke with Kelly about how their documentary perhaps goes into little bit more of the minutia, maybe aimed more at the UFO community who maybe know this stuff already, and you don't have to spoon feed a massive audience. Not that they don't want a massive audience, but to try and get that big primetime audience, you have to spoon feed. Here's the UFO topic. Here's what a whistleblower is. You have to go back over certain things and then bring in new information as well. And this
Right.
series balances that really well. Is that a consideration you had when you started making this, that there was potentially going to be so many more documentaries on the horizon, or were you unsure on the timescales then?
We had no idea because we started working on this. So the series came out in January of 25. So I don't know. We started working on it more than a year before that, probably a year and a half before that. And at that point, I mean, I guess I knew James Fox was making one. That was really the only one I knew about, was the James Fox one at that point. And then gradually there was another one called something about the Beyond that was made by, it's on, I think it's on MGM Plus or something. There's another, I mean, there's so many, right?
Yep.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And I didn't know, we just did our work. And it just turns out that all these other documentaries were in the works as well. We didn't even know about it, except for James, because he's a friend of mine. So I knew what he was up to. Yeah. So it just worked out that all these shows came out within months of each other. It's pretty amazing.
So you've got the documentary series out now, and what's the reception been like? And I suppose one from and I always say the UFO community, and two, the more general public. What are you kind of seeing from both sides?
I mean, I've only seen positive responses. I mean, certainly the people involved with it who were interviewed were thrilled with it, the whole thing. And they're the ones that really take the time to write you. And from the public, yeah, I mean, you don't hear from the people that don't like it, but I think it's a hard thing to not like. It's just so straightforward and well done. So I mean, what I really want to find out is go back to Nat Geo, and hopefully we'll get some stats from them about how many views, how many people are watching it, and things like that, which we don't have yet. So I can't really gauge the response that well, other than just comments people have made and emails we've received have all been really positive. But I don't know what the numbers are in terms of. I just hope a lot of people are watching it, because we want to do season 3, and that'll probably their decision whether we're going to do season 3 is going to depend on whether we have enough people watching season 2. So we're sort of waiting to see how that plays out.
What would you want season 3 to look like? Have you got like a drawing board in your head?
Kind of. I mean, it would, I think we would do more. We'd maybe be able to do a little more with these sort of quotes paranormal or experiencer side of things. I mean, there's it's hard for me to say off the top of my head, but certainly we would probably start the series with the hearing that just happened in DC in November.
Yep.
We've started every series with something like that. Season 2, it was Dave Grosh. So we'll talk about the hearing. Lou's book, we'll probably feature Lou in there. And yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, we have to kind of assess. And then there's the whole Jake Barber story that's just coming out now. I mean, there's always so much material to cover. And we usually do some history in every series as well. So I'd have to sit down with my team, and we would, once we got the green light, we will at some point have to present Nat Geo with a list of topics that we would want to cover. So it's hard for me to say at this point what they would be, but there's more than enough material. I know that.
I'm glad you brought up the experiencer side of things. It was a big part of the conversation I've just had with Kelly Chase. A real controversial element of this topic, because it's so ingrained in UFO lore in the community. We know so many stories and testimonies from people going way back decades that have had these incredible, profound experiences. Some are incredibly challenging to believe. Others, just from
Mhm.
the people themselves or from the testimony. We know about the aerial school, Rua, Zimbabwe. We know about Westall, where you hear these massive, massive groups of school children all seeing incredible things and getting telepathic messages, and almost seems more easy for me to digest. And I know certainly some other folks say the same thing when you hear children telling these stories compared to adults, and there's all that argument. But the experience or conversation, like you say, tends to get left out of mainstream conversation. Was that the reason you said CNN put the brakes on that being included at all in season one? Was it too much for them?
I think so. I think it's just the stigma around that. It's like too woo woo or, too weird. And it's very hard to cover too, because there isn't a lot of hard data. I mean, these are people who have had personal experiences. And sometimes we feature one case in which there was physical evidence of the craft and there were, medical effects and that kind of thing. But most of the stories don't have any way that a journalist can document that they actually happened. So you have to kind of look at the mass totality, which is sort of what you were suggesting with going back over time, the totality of reports, and what kind of studies can you do with the huge number of case reports that have been provided, and how can how can scientists take those apart and learn from them? And there is an interesting study that's going to be taking place. It's underway now at the John Mack Institute, which is now situated at Rice University, where they're going to do just that. They're going to go through John Mack's files and Whitley Strieber's files and see what kind of analysis they can do of that data. So we need to kind of get it more into the hands of scientists. Not all kinds of scientists. I mean, there are people in the humanities and the departments of religion and sociology and psychology and physics and all these different things that can kind of lend their expertise to looking at these cases and just seeing what we can learn from them. And of course, many of the people that have had these experiences are totally credible people. There's nothing weird or wrong with them. So you've got to take them seriously. And maybe they have data. Maybe if they actually have had these close encounters, if you're willing to accept that in some level of reality this happened for them, there's data there, right? There's things they learned from their actual encounters that if you look at over time and you see similarities among lots of different reports, right, of certain details and certain types of things that happen, then that's valuable. It's what, but we're just an early stage, and there is a lot of stigma about it. And it is hard. I understand it, because as a reporter, I haven't been able to cover that topic. It just isn't, it doesn't have the kind of documentation that you need. So I'm just trying to help facilitate it becoming more part of the mainstream narrative so that more people will look at it. And I do think the experiencers need to be respected and not just marginalized.
Yeah, I agree on that. And I know, speaking to Kelly, I was really glad to have her on when I did. And there's people like Kelly and Jay and others who I respect in the field, but I disagree that the general public are ready for that conversation at large. So I appreciate why mainstream scientists, academics, and journalists aren't sitting on 60 Minutes or CNN, Fox, and I have to name all the news networks to not upset anyone these days. But they're not sitting on these big kind of prime time shows live talking about abductions. Well, I say that Ross Coulthart's had some News Nation exclusives recently, but I appreciate the levels to that conversation. And if someone came to you, Leslie, from, say, if we pick the New York Times and they say, Leslie, I'm going to pay you well, and in a month we want a front page expose, exclusive, whatever you want to call it, on like the experiencer phenomenon, on the abduction phenomenon. How much do you think you could truly go to town on that conversation and still have it respected or presented to a public in a way that they can digest that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And of course, the money thing is not an issue for me. I mean,
I'm
it's
just
not
saying
why.
they're kind of like something that you had to do it, not like the money would make a difference, but
It's really hard because I think if I felt like I had the documentation, the level of kind of scrutiny and rigor that that I need, if it was there, I would be writing about it. It's just, I mean, if I was going to, I would try to just get the highest authorities I could possibly get, and maybe talk to medical doctors who had worked with some of the experiencers, document the medical impacts, and look at some of the cases in which there's a lot of physical evidence, like the Terry Lovelace case you might be familiar with, where there was, there are x-rays of implants and weird things inside his body, and he'll go up through the sky at night and it'll register on his cell phone that he went a certain number of steps out. I mean, there's a lot of like documentation. That's what you need, but it's never enough to prove it. So, all you can do is just collect the best cases with the most evidence from the most credible people, and then talk to the authorities who have studied them and know them. And I don't know. I just, but it's a risky thing also, Andy, because of the stigma. I mean, once you've reported on government programs and so on, if you start reporting on this kind of stuff, you might not get to report on government programs anymore.
yeah.
It's just such a fine line. So I feel like the way we did it in season 2 was a way that I could contribute towards that in a safe way by making it part of the series. And I'm not the only person responsible for it, as I would be if I was writing an article, or if I was writing it with Ralph, it would just be the us. But so I think it's a first step for me, is to have it part of the series. And I'd just be very interested to know how people feel, particularly about those 2 episodes. I'm always asking people about them. So we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I said to Kelly, I feel there's still a missing link. There's like a bridge that's not been built yet to get the public that conversation en masse. And maybe, like you say, it is more mainstream scientists, more mainstream academics starting to hear this. Because if you just look at, I mentioned the Ross Coulter News Nation pieces with Lieutenant Colonel John Blitch.
Right.
I'm speaking to John tomorrow night, actually, for the podcast. Obviously, Jake Barber shared a story. Fred Baker came out and spoke. Don Paul has come out. And then if you go into Jason Sands, has just been on, Joe Rogan with Lenville Logan. You're getting all these first-hand witnesses are starting to come forward that we've always kind of wanted. And it's perhaps not happening the way a lot of folks imagined it would happen. And that probably, don't know, frustrates people or scares them a little bit or confuses them, because it wasn't their disclosure. This wasn't how they believed in their head it would play out and what it would look like. But for you, how have you seen that conversation start to bleed in, that people are talking about psychic abilities and consciousness now on a little bit more of a mainstream platform? At the same time, you're presenting a serious documentary for Nat Geo, going out on major platforms where you're talking about abductions, experiencers, and those things are starting to become more mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, really happy about it. And I think maybe this is the time where that can begin to happen. I mean, it's all a matter of timing, as I see it, and evolution, and how the, people gradually opening themselves up to different aspects of this. And, it's always a risk for someone like Jake Barber to combine. I mean, it's amazing to me that you have this top level, insider who's been part of crash retrieval programs at high clearances and all of that, at the same time talking about the consciousness component of the phenomenon and putting them together is to me, it's just a phenomenal breakthrough that happened at all. And my hope is that the timing is right, because we've all kind of known for a long time that consciousness is definitely part of all of this, and that it's impacted by UAP, whatever UAP are, we hardly even know. So you can't ignore that part of it, but yet there's been, the taboo is much stronger on that part of it than it has been on the nuts and bolts. So we've really been focused on the nuts and bolts, but we've come so far with the nuts and bolts now that we even have, people talking in front of Congress, people sworn under oath before Congress, talking about crash retrieval programs. So that's a huge step forward. So now maybe one of the next steps is, where does consciousness come into all of this? And I don't know how it's going to play out. I hope that it's not going to be difficult for Jake to move forward, given what he has revealed, because he's revealed a lot, and he didn't have to do that. He could have just part of his story if he wanted to. But I'm hoping that, there's enough. It seems to be, it seems to me, Andy, like often these things are very organic. The time will, the window will sort of open, and then it'll come from a lot of different areas. Like you're pointing out the new documentary that Jay King and Kelly did, and then our series, and then Jake, and there's sort of the consciousness kind of experiencer side of things just kind of makes itself known, and it comes from a lot of different areas, but it happens kind of organically. It's not like everybody planned to coordinate it. You know what I mean? I guess that's what I'm getting at. So I'm hoping that maybe this is the time where that can begin to happen, and it seems like it is happening. And also the Soul Foundation has been, this very rigorous, academically oriented, scientifically oriented, kind of on the ground think tank has been also opening itself up to this component of it, the experiencer element. And they had a speaker at the last symposium named Karen Austin, who was an experiencer, and she revealed that. And it was the most powerful. That talk got the more response from the audience than any of the others. So I think people are ready for this. I hope, at least people within the community, I think are. I don't know how it's going to play on the outside world, but I just think, it's time for this to be integrated, and it has to be done in a very careful and thoughtful way so that we don't go too far and it doesn't backfire on us. But so I'm really trying to facilitate that happening. But you just never know. But so far, I think it's been okay. From what I've seen. Yeah.
There were rumors a few years ago, and I think we did touch on this a couple of years back, Leslie, that there was going to be a New York Times big exclusive article on crash retrievals. You probably remember that around the time. Is that something
Ralph and I did, where there was all this build up about it, and then
there was a huge build up, and then there was rumors before. I think the article came to life and died several times before anyone saw it, because we heard it was going to be on crash retrieval programs, first-hand witnesses. Then it's been kiboshed and it's been stripped back, and then an article eventually came out that was the follow-up to the 2017, and there was this, oh look, it's been bastardized and everything's been taken out of it. And I think you said yourself, and Ralph at the time as well, that wasn't the case. Was there ever a plan to have this sort of content around crash retrievals in any article, and you can see familiarity now in what's coming out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was in July of 22, right? That
sounds about right. Yeah, it was summer.
And what the problem was there is that we were writing an article that was going to not just cover crash retrievals, because we had to cover other things as well. That we could never get an article only on crash retrievals in the New York Times. But our goal was to get as much as we could about crash retrievals in the body of this story. And I remember what happened was, and we never want anybody to know when we're writing a piece for the New York Times because of these kinds of problems. It leaked out somehow that we were doing this story, and it was all over the place, and everybody was talking about it and creating rumors and things that weren't true about it, and it was really distracting and awful for Ralph and I to have to deal with that. It's just, and they're all trying to figure out what you're saying, so they'll start asking people that you might have talked to as a source. To just gets to be really messy. And then when we did bring it out, we didn't have a lot on crash retrievals, and I think there had been so much buildup, right, an expectation that maybe people were disappointed. But in reality, we got, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs, I don't remember how much, in the New York Times years before David Grush, talking about the fact that there are crash retrieved objects. And we had Eric Davis on the record saying they were not from this world. And a couple of other things that I think that members of Congress or congressional committees have been briefed on this very topic. That was in there too. So, the fact that we could get anything in there at all was like a miracle because, the New York Times, the editors are so tough there. So, yeah, but it was unfortunate that when there's a lot of hype, it's always problematic, especially when you're not the ones doing the hype. Other people are, you know what I mean, about something you were involved with. So that was really a mess. And but looking back, I think it was an accomplishment that we were ahead of the curve and we got something in a major paper like that on crash retrievals the way we did. I mean, I'm just going to frame it in a positive way. And there was a lot more that we could have included, which the editors, ruled. The editors took things out. They only give you a limited amount of space. You're really up against it. So we did the best we could, but I think what we got was important.
Do you think that would still be the case now at the New York Times, given what's come out? Would they be a little more open to having maybe some more of that in, do you think, if you tried again?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping so. I mean, we're always, I can't talk too much about it, but we're always putting things together to try to bring to them. It depends who the editors are. There's been some shift in some of the editors. So I can't imagine they wouldn't be more open to it now, given that we've had congressional hearings where two people have sworn that we have these programs in front of Congress. That alone, should be enough to sort of legitimize the whole thing. So I would hope so. People have to remember that Ralph and I are freelancers. We're not on the staff at the New York Times. So every time we want to do a story, we have to pitch it to them and then they have to say, okay, go ahead, or no, one or the other. But so if they can get their staff reporter to cover something that happens, they'll do that instead of coming to us. Like if there's a congressional hearing that they want an article about, they'll just get one of their staff people on it. And unfortunately, that person doesn't have any context for it, is not informed about the issue. They might be really skeptical. And so the article doesn't come out the way Ralph and I would have written it. But they don't come to us for things like that. We have to go to them and we have to get something special that their own staff couldn't get or wouldn't bother to get. So, yeah, so, it's just you're right. We have to gauge what they might be receptive to at particular times. And it's really difficult, Andy, but when we do it, it makes such a big impact that, it's worth all the difficulty of having it happen. That's why we stick with it, because it can have such a big impact for something to come out in that paper, as we saw in 2017. So we want to keep those doors open there, but it's not easy. That's why people don't see more stories from us. It's not that we're not trying to make it happen. It's so many factors that weigh in on whether we can do it or not at the times. That's what it boils down to.
So it's over 7 years now, 7 years and 2 months and change, since you wrote that article with Ralph Blumenthal, who has been on the podcast a few times, and Helene Cooper, who has kept herself a little more to herself, of course, which we can appreciate. Since then, you mentioned we've had hearings, we've had multiple organisations at various political levels, Arrow, oh God, what was the stupidly named one? Like six.
Which one?
AIMSOG, that was AIMSO, whatever it was, right? Nobody even seemed to know. The UAP task force, we've had multiple leaks of alleged UAP from official sources that have been brought forward. Now, as we enter February 2025, we've discussed whistleblowers, Leslie. When you wrote that article back in 2017, speaking to the people you spoke to at the time and since, is this how you saw things potentially playing out, going this way? Or was there any kind of talk of, here's the plan, here's what we hope, and here's a rough timescale?
No, I mean, nothing like that. No, we were just focused on, let's just get this story out. And we knew it was a big story. And I mean, the hope was, I think at the time, that Congress would pay attention, which eventually happened. But no, I don't think any of us were looking down the road. There was no plan or any kind of orchestration of anything going on. And I haven't seen any of that ever. I mean, I think people like to think that there's some kind of somebody in some dark room who's controlling everything that happens. I just really don't think that's the case. So no, I mean, it was very much one step at a time. Let's just take this step and see what happens. Yeah.
You know, when you say that, the idea of someone in a dark room controlling everything, I think I've sort of made peace with that. It's lots of little groups and lots of little dark rooms, all controlling little aspects of this. And
Yeah.
that's a bigger issue than anything because they don't want to know what each other's doing and they don't want to let on, but they want to keep their own piece of the pie. And that's why it's so that compartmentalization is the famous word everyone likes to use now.
Yeah.
And it's perhaps not one shadowy cabal anymore, and it's so many little groups that are just fighting for their own little corner of this, which makes it so difficult to get forward. Is
Yep.
that fair?
Yeah, and even with inside what's called the legacy program, there's factions and components, and they don't communicate with each other, and they're doing their thing over here and over there. I mean, I just think it's completely disorganized. That's my understanding. Um, so that's how it is. Yeah, it's chaotic, chaos out there.
Can you think of any reason why, though? Then we hear, and this is me just speculating, we hear that some of these groups or private aerospace contractors want to divest themselves of bits of technology they may have been given by the government in decades gone by. Why they would want to do that? Why they would want to give this stuff up now?
I don't know much about that. I mean, it's not something I've looked into. I haven't spoken to anyone from any company who says they want to do that. Maybe it's such a hot potato that they just don't want to have any part of it. Maybe they're afraid they'll get into some kind of trouble once disclosure happens. They'll be accused of something. I just don't know, but it's certainly isn't a simple thing to be in possession of this material. That's for sure. So, and then it seems like other companies just want to hold on to it as tightly as they can and keep the secrecy going. So it seems like everything that could happen, every attitude that could exist is out there somewhere, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know what motivates the decisions and the attitudes that they have. I really don't.
I mean,
It's
Leslie, if you discovered the formula for writing the best articles that got the public's attention worldwide and only you knew it, would you be going out and giving it to every other journalist, or would you keep it for yourself to use it as you saw fit?
I mean, I like collaborating with other journalists, and I do. I'm in conversation with all my colleagues who report on this topic, so I don't think I would want to hold on to that. I mean, I might want to be the first one to do the story using that method, but no, because the bigger goal is we're all part of a big network and we all want the same thing, and everybody has a role to play. And people, I mean, me and my colleagues, we report in different styles on different platforms, and everybody has something to contribute. So I like to look at it as a network of cooperation, not competition. Um, and I just that's how I see it. So
And,
yeah.
and you've got various journalists who, like you mentioned quite rightly, who may be on the staff at various organisations, news networks, newspapers, who have their own thoughts and bias on the UFO topic. They may be very sceptical. They may want to actually go and proactively debunk. They may be a little more open to the topic. They may be quite interested and happy to report on it like a true journalist should. Do you feel that the fight's kind of leaning towards people being more pro the UFO topic now, given the progress of the last 6 or 7 years? Or do you think there's still enough of a stigma weighing it down that it still leans towards that kind of sneering, sniggering little green men, haha, let's not treat this too seriously?
I think it's definitely changed for the better. I think if you look back to 2017, because I worked on this topic for 17 years prior to that New York Times story, and it's like night and day. So, and then I think since 2017, so many more people have come on board with this. I mean, and that includes journalists and it includes scientists and all kinds of policymakers. I mean, we've seen it. You just have to look at everything that's happened. So I definitely notice that the stigma has diminished a lot. There are more and more reporters taking it seriously. There are more podcasts now, more people coming forward. So it's very different. And I think constantly growing in the right direction. I don't have any concerns about that.
Let's get through some listener questions because they jump over a few different elements of the conversation, Leslie, that we'll come back to as well. Ryan said, I want Leslie's thoughts on the telepathy tapes and the connections with the sort of realm of the people who have passed on. Obviously, we spoke the last time you were on, Leslie, about Surviving Death, which had just come out on Netflix in documentary form. And you've investigated and written on the NDE subject at length, haven't you?
Well, in my book, Surviving Death, which was the basis of the Netflix series, yeah. I mean, I did write about NDEs. It wasn't one of the hugest topics in my book, but I was looking at all the different areas of evidence that kind of support the hypothesis that there is some element of consciousness that survives death. And so so that's sort of what the book Surviving Death was. It came out in 2017.
Yeah, so Ryan was wanting to know about your thoughts on the telepathy tapes and the connections with the sort of realm of people who have passed on.
Yeah, I mean, the telepathy tapes, I was blown away by those. I hope that everybody listens to them. I think they're phenomenal. And it was just fascinating to me. And I hope that more resources will be given to the further studies of those children, some of them adults, but these non-speaking autistic people who have these abilities. We need to have very systematic scientific studies done of them that can go into peer-reviewed journals to really establish, because this is real. This is a real phenomenon, and it needs to be, brought into the scientific world. So I'm really excited about those telepathy. I thought they were really fascinating. I'm glad you had Kai on your show, because and so much interest in those things. And so the second part of the question had to do with how that relates to communications.
That realm of people being passed on, yeah.
Because the similarity is that if you're going to hear messages that you're interpreting to be from a deceased person or deceased loved one, it's all telepathic. So it helps sort of validate people's experiences of receiving telepathic communications from deceased loved ones. And I'm one of those people. And I wrote about it in Surviving Death. I mean, I took a risk and decided, well, I'm not going to exclude my own personal experiences. When I received a telepathic message that I believed it to be a telepathic message from my deceased brother. And it was so clear to me that it was not coming from inside my head. And it was his voice so clearly. So, I don't know what else it could have been. I can't prove that to anybody, but that something like the telepathy tapes, if you can document that telepathy is a real ability that people have, then it allows for more for validity, for I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. Validation, that's the word, yeah, of people's reception of telepathic communications from not only deceased people, but even from other humans. And so I believe these are all abilities that people have, and anything that's going to help show us that that's the case is going to be an expansive revelation for anybody who's interested in, connecting to these other realms. So I think it's absolutely wonderful that it's happening. And I would encourage people not to doubt if they feel like they are in communication with a deceased person and they are getting telepathic communications. This helps validate that, right? No reason to doubt it. Let it be what you want it to be. Let it be your truth and your reality, and don't worry about it. That's another message I would give, independent of research, but any kind of research that validates that is very positive.
Michael says, can you ask Leslie if she sees any overlap between the UAP NHI topic and the amazing things she witnessed with the medium Stuart Alexander? In particular, has the question of what are NHI ever been asked of Stuart's spirit guides?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting questions. Yeah. I mean, I don't think the overlap between the phenomena that go on in Stuart Alexander's seance room, and I don't know if you need me to explain what they are. I don't know if all your listeners know, but
if you could, because I'm not overly familiar, but if you could, please, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the questioner is asking about this physical medium in the UK who I've worked with for about, I don't know, almost 10 years now. His name's Stuart Alexander. And he is absolutely authentic. And I've done all my due diligence on that. I'm not going to waste time on it. He is a physical medium, means that he's somebody who goes into a trance state and then through the activity, through these spirit guides who work through his body and use his vocal cords to speak, all these physical manifestations occur in the room that can be witnessed and experienced by all the people in the room. So they're objective, they happen over and over and over again every time at a certain day of the week when they sit together. And I've experienced them many, many, many times. And so there are things that science can't explain, such as the levitation of objects, voices speaking in midair, not speaking through anybody's body, materialization of hands, a living hand, materialization of a full person. I know this is very, very hard for anybody to accept, but you have to delve into the whole world of this in order to understand it. So it's very hard to just talk about it briefly like I'm doing now. But in my book, Surviving Death, I do give histories about it and kind of walk people through why and how they can understand that this actually happens. So if you're curious, I would encourage you to look at that. But also matter going through matter, like they sometimes a physical strap will be pulled right through Stuart's body. A lot of very, very amazing physical phenomena occur. And so then the question becomes, how does that relate to UAP? It doesn't really specifically, except that you're dealing with the impossible. You're dealing with something that science is saying can't possibly happen, yet it does happen. Same thing with UAP. That it's not really explainable through science, although it's becoming more and more explainable. It also involves consciousness in a certain way. I mean, obviously the phenomena that occur with Stuart is all about the consciousness of the sitters, the consciousness of the medium. Somehow that's facilitating physical manifestation. So there's a link somehow between consciousness and physicality. And I think that's similar with UAP too, that they're physical objects, but they're affected by people's consciousness, and they affect people's consciousness back and forth, right? So it's all, to be in the bigger sense, it's about the relationship between consciousness and the physical world. To me, that's always been a really interesting question, is like, how do those things relate? And so, yeah, I think maybe that relates to UAP as well. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but they are physical objects that connect with consciousness. And I think Jake Barber's recent story has really illustrated that very, very well, that the impact that it had on his consciousness to be close to a UAP, an object, a physical thing that affected his consciousness and his emotions. That's an illustration again of the link between those two things. So I don't know. That seems to me a lot of what it's all about, but I can't really put my finger on or explain how it works or why it works. But he talks about a field of consciousness that's out there, and these people with psychic abilities that he calls psionics can just get into a state through their mental state where they can kind of put up an antenna and plug into that field of consciousness. And somehow that ability connects them to UAP and allows them to even communicate with the UAP. So it's all interconnected in some way, the consciousness versus the physical object and the phenomena that occur. So it's a huge question, Andy, don't you think? I mean, it's a really big question that everybody is so curious about, for good reason, is how does this all hold together? How do all these manifestations of consciousness and all the abilities that people have that, and sometimes these abilities are they come into people's lives after they've seen a UFO, right? It suddenly opens up all these potentials like clairvoyant dreams and visions and all kinds of expansive psychic abilities they didn't have before. So how is all that interconnected? How does consciousness connect with all of this, with UAP and with other phenomenon as well? So I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of going stream of consciousness here, because I don't really have a clear, specific answer, but there's definitely some kind of interconnection that and I think we're going to learn more and more about what that is over time. I think we're sort of on the precipice of learning more about that.
How do you feel? Have you got any opinion? And this is just kind of all happening in the last few days. Jake Barber, through his Skywatcher organization, have mentioned they're going to put on like a small event where they're looking for people to register their interest in a location, US only at the moment, obviously. 50 to 100 people, and they're going to basically summon these egg objects. Now, that's fantastic. I do appreciate that very quickly a lot of folks jumped on, here we go, they're selling tickets to events already. Jake very quickly mentioned we are not looking for money for any tickets for these events, which I'm glad they put up. But it does then start to, why can't you just get a live news crew and film one of these things live on the news, and there you go, the public can see an egg, or bring it right down next to us? And it's perhaps easy to say it's not as easy as that, which I'm guessing is the answer. But what are your thoughts on that sort of setup happening so quickly after Jake's come out? Like I say, I'm glad there's not money involved. Just it makes it a little bit cleaner for people to appreciate kind of what's going on. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to make of it. I haven't spoken to him. I think I will be speaking to him, but I haven't yet. So all I know is what everybody else knows. And I think, I just have to assume that if it were that easy that they could just bring one down right away, that they would. I mean, my sense of it is that it takes a lot of work for these psionic assets, as they call them, to communicate and get them to come in. And I don't know how they do it or why the UAP even respond to it. So I don't know. My assumption is it just takes time to build that up to make it actually happen. I don't think it's, but yeah, if they could bring one down tomorrow, I would assume that they would. And and we also don't know what they might have already done that they're not telling us. We don't know. Maybe they've already brought craft down. Or, I mean, it's all a big question mark right now, but I certainly hope that they can do it.
I start to wonder, and this is maybe a really stupid thought, but this topic's confusing. Like, are there a finite number of these objects even available to summon? For example, if you could have psionics in every city across the globe, thousands of people all at once in different locations summoning these objects, are they all going to manage to manifest 1,000 of these egg objects on those locations? Or is it a case of there's actually 10 of these things wherever they are? And yeah, I've had that thought, and I don't even know how to. I'm not eloquent enough to put it across, but these UFOs. What if there are a finite amount of them, and there's only 20, and visiting the whole planet at any one time? Yeah, they move really quickly, and yeah, they go place to place. Maybe they're based off the coast of California, but they go to India, they go to Chile, they go to Jamaica, and people have these sightings and they do whatever. But maybe there's a finite number of them at any one time. And that's why, it is so sparse. And I don't know, is that ever something you've thought of, or is that just ridiculous?
No, I don't think it's at all ridiculous. It's a good question. No, I mean, I have no idea how many there are. I mean, my intuition is that there are a lot of them, just because there's so many sightings, and not just eggs, but all different types,
Yeah.
So many sightings all the time, all over the place, that I just sort of have always assumed there's a lot. And I've always sort of, I don't know, I mean, I don't know anything. I don't know anything more about this question than you do or anybody else, but, I can just speculate that, perhaps whatever the NHI is, whatever that force is that's behind all of this, can manifest as many of these craft as they want. That's sort of my intuition, but it's total speculation. I have no idea, but that's an interesting point you raise about what would happen if people all over the world at the same time could summon them in. I mean, my question would be, how difficult is it to do that? I mean, I'm assuming that you really have to know what you're doing to be able to do that. You really have to work on it and have incredible ability to be able to do whatever it takes to draw in the UAP. And I don't know if it's something that people can just decide to do all over the world. I don't know how many people there are that could actually do it. I guess that's my question. And I have no way of knowing, but I don't imagine it's an easy thing to do.
No. Couple of questions similar to that we've kind of gone into. So thank you, Chase, who sent in a similar question. From Rage Jack Sozzy, I hope I'm saying that right. Can you ask Leslie whether she has recently noticed a rising of remote viewing and other psychic skills among people?
Yeah, I mean, It's so interesting. I would say, I don't know if I've noticed more of a rising of them. I think that more people are talking about them now. I think the telepathy tapes have helped a lot, kind of open people's, made people more willing to talk about these topics and to take them seriously. So I don't know how much of it is that or how much of it that it's more common now. But my tendency is to think it's about people's willingness to be public and open about these things like remote viewing and things like that, and for them just to be more widely accepted, because they've been going on for forever, really. And maybe as they become more widely accepted, then more and more people engage with it. So they reinforce each other. But yeah, it seems to me like it's more part of the sort of accepted package of everything we're dealing with here than it used to be, for sure. And it's all connected too to what we're talking about consciousness becoming recognized as more of a component of all of this. So that includes abilities like remote viewing and telepathy and everything we've been talking about. So I just see the future of humankind evolving to include and accept these kinds of abilities as a natural part of who we are as human beings, and not thinking them as just some weird, marginalized, unscientific claim that people are making. I mean, I think over time we're going to evolve into a much more accepted, living with all of that as it's normal, which happens in other cultures already. But I think it's a slow evolution that we're going to go through. But I think we're on our way through that, into that, a different perspective on who we are and what we're capable of. I hope that's the case. Yeah.
Ricky wanted to know, what has been the most surprising aspect of the UAP subject so far to you?
Oh, wow. What a question. The most surprising aspect, oh gosh. I mean, it goes in phases. I'd have to think back. I've been involved with this thing for 25 years now. I mean, initially it was just the reality that they even exist at all was very surprising, right? And then, you learn, let me just think about, different stages. Every time something new comes out about the phenomenon where we learn more and more about it, it's always a surprise in a certain sense. I mean, so gosh, it's hard for me to put my finger on anything one specific thing. One thing that comes to my mind is when I was writing my book that came out in 2010. There were two pilots who had been involved with trying to shoot down UFOs. I thought that was really a surprise to me. What happened when they tried to shoot them down? In one case, the objects were able to disable the systems on the plane that were actually sending out the I think it were small missiles or something. I don't remember. It was the case of Parviz Jafari from Iran, and then the Peruvian pilot shot these huge shells right at the object, and it didn't even affect it. They're just things you learn over time where you just go, "Whoa, that's a shock." And they're not. It's hard for me to pinpoint them all right now, but it's all about stages. Yeah.
Is there an element of the subject that you think goes really under talked about or underreported at all?
I think, it has been so far sort of what we've been talking about, both the experiencer element and the sort of paranormal side of it, how it affects people's minds, because that's been sort of taboo to talk about. It's been very focused on nuts and bolts and national security, right? Physical objects that are a national security problem. That's the debate. And it all has to go into that box in order to become part of the mainstream narrative. So I think the other sort of more mysterious, mind-oriented and personal and paranormal aspects of this have been shelved because they're much more taboo. I mean, even for instance, for Lou Elizondo to come out in his book and talk about the green orbs that were flying around his own house, right? That were seen by his wife and family and neighbors. That was like no, you don't talk about those things, right? In 2017, he would never have talked about those things.
No.
And so, there's an evolution towards those kinds of things, right? Like weird events that happen to people that are connected to UAP, but that are even weirder than just the concept of a physical spacecraft. And there's lots of weird stuff. And, people like Jacques Vallée have been talking about it for a long time, and a lot of other people, but it hasn't been part of the mainstream. So I think we're going to get, that's sort of been what's shoved aside. And now it seems like gradually we're bringing a lot more of that into the dialogue, which is really important, because to study the phenomenon, you have to look at all of it. You can't just take one aspect of it and study that and pretend the rest doesn't exist. You just can't do that. It's you have to look at all of it, and there's a lot of different components to it that people don't want to deal with, and they're much harder to put your finger on too, because they have to do with consciousness and perception. I think that the physical elements too are really important, the medical effects, and those are becoming more and more part of the dialogue as well. But even those haven't been talked about till fairly recently. So yeah, all the different components need to be on the table if we're ever going to understand what it is.
When was the last time you learned something that made you go, wow, or, I thought I knew it all, but?
I would say listening to the 2.5-hour interview that Jake Barber did with Ross Coulthart, which wasn't that long ago.
Okay.
It was, wow, that really, really, was a real revelation for me listening to that. And you've got to really listen to the full interview to really understand his story.
Oh, 100%. That 40 minutes didn't do it justice at all.
It didn't. That's impossible. I can't ask anybody to try to tell his story in a 45-minute thing with commercials and, no. But that was, I sort of felt like, it was a real moment for me. It was one of those, oh, wow, kind of ontological shift moments. And that was only 3 or 4 days ago so these things happen all the time. We're moving so quickly right now. And new revelations are coming around all the time. And to me, that was his story was the most recent one that really, really affected me.
So last couple of questions in as we start to wrap up. EG593, probably not their birth name, said, how Leslie feels about disinformation playing a part in any new narrative, i.e. controlling the narrative?
It's something you have to be looking out for. And it's so difficult and unpleasant to have to look out for it. But you always have to ask that question. Are there disinformation agents here? Are they trying to bring somebody down by feeding them information that will eventually bring them down? All the complexities. So I'm no expert on it. I rely on a lot of people to help me sort those kinds of things out. But all I can say is, it's a factor that you have to always be aware of and always have to be looking out for. And we know through history that disinformation agents have done a lot of damage. Hopefully they have less power now than they did in the past, but there are certainly anti-disclosure forces that are working in all kinds of ways to prevent it from happening. Disinformation may be one component of it, but yeah. And I guess on Twitter or X, I'm not part of that universe. Andy, I'm sure you are. I'm sure there's isn't there all kinds of platforms there where there are fake people coming on and pretending to be this or that and putting out all kinds of disinformation just to confuse people. It must go on all the time on social media.
Yeah.
I don't know how to sort it out. It's really difficult and so messy and horrible.
Yeah. Have you ever come across that happening to you, or someone attempting to, feed you disinformation?
I'd have to think about that, but nothing major enough to jump
Not like
right
a
in.
big way, yeah. Nothing like sabotage of an article. Nah.
I've been fortunate. I haven't. I don't know if it's just because I'm so public that I don't get harassed. Because I know plenty of people that do get that kind of harassment, or they get their emails get hacked, or weird stuff happens. And a lot of it happens to people on their computers, where obviously somebody's messing with them, trying to warn them. And that's not disinformation, but it's harassment.
Yeah.
I'm just trying. I've talked to plenty of sources who over the years, not so much recently, but where I have questions about what they're saying and their intentions,
Mm.
and so I don't necessarily follow down that path with them. But sometimes you don't know if it's disinformation or not. You just can sense that that's somewhere you don't want to go any further with this person. Um, but nothing major like that where I've like been tricked into doing like a story or something that turned out to be based on disinformation. I mean, that just hasn't happened. I hope
Yeah.
it never does. I hope it
No,
never
no.
does.
I think the last couple of years I've tried to come away from putting too much stock in any one person or one organization to spearhead or lead disclosure, whatever it may be. Because I think it would be so easy if someone did come out as, being a disinfo person, or they were got to, or someone gets caught lying when they could have been telling the truth and then something else happens, that can be pretty damaging to the topic. And yeah,
Right.
so I like to try and take a step back and look at the bigger picture, including maybe some of the voices and opinions that I don't necessarily buy into myself, but try and listen to everyone's opinion, but make up my own mind and kind of see all sides of the argument. So it's a murky swamp to navigate at times, and you'll know that better than anyone.
It certainly is, and that's one reason why I don't go into that Twitter world very often, because because of what you just said. It's too murky for me, and all the infighting and everything.
I've not said this, honestly, Leslie, I've not said this for a while, right? But I think people don't quite realize that just because you have X number of followers does not mean they are all sitting waiting in a stadium on you sending a tweet or a whatever you want to call it these days, right? And I think some people overvalue these 2 or 3 people are having an argument on Twitter or on X. It's like your neighbors out in the street having an argument. The entire estate, an entire city does not hear those people having an argument. It might seem like when you're on that street hearing it that that's what's happening, but it's not. Everyone else is going about their lives and missing it or seeing it or weren't even there at the time. And
Right.
it happens in such isolation, but can be blown so out of proportion as well. There's a whole self-importance that goes on with, yeah, I've never bought into it. So
I hear what you're saying, and they're just wanting to get as many clicks as they can. So the more controversial they are, the better, I guess. But anyway, yeah, it's pretty messy out there.
I hate all that slander and controversy, but who are the top 5 people you hate in the UFO world, Leslie? No, I wouldn't ask you. But let's bring Twitter to life. I wanted to ask you on that then. Chris says, how much do you believe the abduction side of the phenomenon plays a part in the government's avoidance of disclosure? And how can this side of the topic be discussed without widespread panic or fear?
Yeah, that's such an important question, and I really don't have the answer, although I know some people who are very deeply involved with the abduction issue, and I believe John Blitch might have said this himself in his interview with Ross, that
Yeah.
that is the key issue behind the secrecy. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but some people believe that that is the bottom line of the whole thing. And it's certainly a minority of people who are claiming that or believing that, and I don't know if they're right or not. It's just not something you've heard. You heard for decades about national security and all these things protecting technology, but maybe this is a big component of it. I don't know. I haven't talked to any insiders who have told me that they're part of any program that's involved with that particular issue. But it was I think that was one of the main points that John Blitch was making, right? That this was crucial to the secrecy. And you can imagine that it would be, given the inability. It's all part of the package of our government not being able to protect people from this all-powerful phenomenon that we can't control and do anything about. And a component of that is people being abducted or affected in their personal lives. And there's nothing the government can do about it. So they certainly wouldn't want people to know that. Makes sense, right? But
Yeah.
I have no inside information about to what level that is a component. But I trust people like John Blitch, who probably has more access to people, along that avenue than I do, because he's had the experience himself. So he's going to be very focused on that. So I guess that's one thing we'll learn more about over time as well. How real are these experiences, and why have they been happening, and to what extent are they part of the whole secrecy that's been put in place? I don't think we have the answer to that.
Final listener question. What is Leslie's probability score that disclosure or confirmation, or whatever you want to call it, will happen this year?
Depends how you define it, I guess. Like disclosure,
I'll
going how
define. Yeah, let's go with because it tends to be that the government, in quotation marks, or some higher authority comes out and says, yeah, we've got proof of a non-human intelligence. Let's go with that one.
right, and they don't give much detail about it, but they're forced to acknowledge that it exists.
Yeah,
I mean,
at least at base level, yeah.
I mean, I don't know about this year. I mean, I would say, and again, this is just speculation. I don't know anything, right? I would say low for it to become official. That doesn't mean that something might not happen, like Jake Barber producing a craft. But I think it's going to take time for the government to actually respond and formulate and be willing to. They're going to resist as long as they can. But so I don't know. This year, meaning 2025,
Yeah.
I'd say official disclosure kind of low, but I'm hopeful. I'm more hopeful than I've ever been. I think it's on the horizon. I think it's eventually going to happen because there's not going to be any choice about it. But whether it'll happen this year, I don't know. But I'm really bad at speculating about stuff like that.
Listen, even the people who would claim to be good at speculating tend to be pretty bad because they put dates on things, and those dates tend to come and go. So it's not very often, I think, in the UFO topic we do get something promised and have it delivered in any way, shape, or form. So when it does happen, kudos to those who manage it.
Exactly. That's a good way to leave it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
on that, so 2025, what are you working on now and for the rest of the year, Leslie? Is there anything UFO centric?
Yeah, it's always pretty UFO centric. Ralph Blumenthal, my New York Times writing partner, we're always digging into following leads and seeing if we can get something going with the New York Times. There's so much time we spend on that, which doesn't come to fruit. It doesn't bear fruit because of all kinds of reasons. So a lot of communicating and talking to people. We hope to be working on season 3, for the Nat Geo series. We can do that. I've also co-authored a play that deals with the existential implications of disclosure on society and on human beings, and I'm trying to get that done or produced. So I'm always working on that in the background. I have lots of research projects I'm doing, and I just always feel incredibly busy. But it's hard to talk about all of them. I tend to not talk about too much until I actually have something concrete to offer. I don't believe in like hyping things up or trying to make promises to people. So I will just keep working as hard as I can to do as much as I can to help and in the way that I'm uniquely able to do that, which is my particular road. And other people, everybody contributes in their own way, and everybody has a role to play. It's how I look at it. So I'll also be going to the conference at Rice University in April. I've been involved with the Archives of the Impossible to some extent there. I really love what they do. So maybe I'll see a bunch of your listeners there. I hope I do. But it's going to be a really special event, as have the Soul Conference. The Soul Foundation conferences, I think, have also been excellent. And I also think the Rice University conferences are great. So planning to do that. And yeah, I'm just always digging around and trying to find the next story and help in any way I can.
Awesome. Well, folks, UFOs Investigating the Unknown Season 2 is available in the United States through Hulu and Disney Plus, and in the UK it's currently on Nat Geo, National Geographic, on Sky On Demand. Episode 3 is being aired Monday the 3rd of February, and the first 2 episodes are also available on demand. So, Leslie, thank you so much for your time. Always good to chat to you, and best of luck with your projects this year.
Thanks, Andy. It was really fun to talk to you, and thanks for having me on.